Hello, welcome to the first design diary for the TTRPG, currently called Project Cerberus. Before I get into the design topic I want to discuss today, I do want to talk about a few things that is going to be a common theme throughout these design diaries. First, as often as possible, I am going to reference back to video games, not other TTRPGs. I'm doing this because I don't want to bash other TTRPGs. I don't want to seem like I'm bashing other TTRPGs. So I'm just going to avoid that as often as possible by specifically referencing video games. Now, I do know a lot of people are going to be concerned that I am talking so much about video games, because I know one of the biggest complaints people had about the 4th edition of Dungeons & Dragons was that it was too video gamey. I don't want to imply or give you the impression here that I am including video game rules or anything like that. I do believe there is a lot to be learned from video games, not in the how they did it, but the why they did the things that they did. I am not trying to build a video game like TTRPG. I'm trying to build a story game TTRPG. So don't think that because I'm talking about video games so much that I plan on implementing all sorts of video game things. That is not the goal. Hopefully that comes across in each video. But if you've seen this one and somebody is talking in the comments about of a later design video about how I'm clearly doing terrible things because I'm stealing from video games, send them back here to this video so they can hopefully see this and believe when I say I'm not cribbing from video game design for this game. That is not why I'm talking about video games so much. So, the first design topic that I want to hit on for this very first video, I did already talk about some in the Kickstarter videos, and that is verisimilitude. Verisimilitude is all about truth. Truth in storytelling is my goal here. I did mention in that other video things like charging across a room and being able to duck behind objects and react to things that are happening in the game as if they were happening just like in a story, just like if it were a fiction story that was written out. Because I am looking to have the gameplay bring across just as much of the story as the GM does. Because a thing that happens in other RPGs a lot of the time, and yes, I know I just said I wasn't going to reference RPGs as much as possible, but there's no video games I can reference that do this. This is an RPG, tabletop RPG problem, not a video game problem. But to keep the rules simpler, sacrifices are made to the verisimilitude of the game. And you can't tell the story through gameplay. The gameplay is always separate from the story to some degree. And even in my game, that is going to be true. But in some games, it's a bigger hurdle. And depending on the types of stories you're telling, the type of game you want to play, what it is you are trying to get out of this, that may or may not be a problem. Your ability to bridge that gap mentally yourself is fine. You take your turn, the enemy takes their turn, and then when you're telling that story to friends afterwards, congratulations, you have now told the story not the way it happened at the table, but the way you envisioned it happening in the game. You bridged that gap to tell it as if it were the fiction story that you were envisioning, despite the fact that it was your turn, his turn, your turn, his turn. But I want to make that easier, not just to limit the amount of mental workload you have to do to bridge that gap, but also so that the story can do things that you didn't see coming. Because every GM is eventually going to get stuck in a mental rut. Happens to me all the time. I end up using the same descriptions for scenarios over and over and over again because I have to provide so many battle descriptions over the course of the weeks and months of GMing a game. And they start to become the same because, okay, I haven't used that description for a month or two, but, I'm only using 25 descriptions spread out over the course of, 4, 5, 6 sessions. And then they start to recycle. And I just get stuck in that rut. And I'm sure it happens to other people. By making the rules focus on verisimilitude and providing the ability for the rules to do some of the work for you, surprising things that the GM didn't have to think of can happen. And yes, this could equally be achieved by just having a random table of events. I don't like those because okay, this may end up with a weird edit. I do apologize. I've mentioned before I'm not super good at this video thing, and I am a solo creator. These videos, the whole kit and caboodle, just me. My SD card filled. I was halfway through recording this design diary, and I didn't want to try recreating it. These are entirely off-the-cuff discussions that I'm having with you. And yeah, I didn't want to try recreating it. So there's probably going to be a weird edit in here. Anyway, I was talking about those random tables and how they break down the verisimilitude, at least for me. Maybe you don't have that problem. I don't know. But for me, because it could literally be anything happening on those random tables, and they're not guided enough, you end up with the potential for an event that just is completely outlandish for the scenario. And yeah, you just, re-roll or you whatever. And that is entirely a solution. But I'm looking for a more organic solution. A solution that is going to create those moments for you. Help you as the GM create those moments without having to create them yourself. And going with the verisimilitude, the fact that the game helped do that, the next time that an almost identical series of events happens, you're going to get almost identical series of results. Yes, it's not a big bother to some people because the almost identical thing happened, 3 months ago. Nobody remembers exactly what the GM said then, so if it's different this time, who cares? That's fine. But sometimes it happens again the following week. And then the GM forgot exactly what they did, but the players remembered. And now it's like, oh, why is it different this time? That's confusing to me. And for me anyway, and for the players at my table, just the thought that can happen brings us out of the story. It breaks our immersion that little bit. So that's where the verisimilitude is being brought in here. I think back to something that I read from Ed Greenwood years and years ago. For people who don't know, Ed Greenwood is the original creator of the Forgotten Realms campaign setting, the big Dungeons and Dragons campaign setting for the last, I don't know, decade or so in Dungeons and Dragons, in Wizards of the Coast game. When asked why he created, or why he gave away control of this world, why he didn't maintain control of the world, I think by fans who are upset that it went in a direction that they didn't like and they didn't think Ed Greenwood would have taken it, but I don't know for certain on that. His statement was he gave up control so the world could do things that surprised him. I am trying to create rules for this game that will allow surprises to happen for both the GM and the players. Events will happen that you were not expecting, either the GM or the PCs at the game, and you guys are going to have to integrate into your story and work your way through it and go with the flow. That is why I am using the verisimilitude the way I am using it. The reason why I am bringing in so many rules. That's the main reason anyway. Another reason is I want the game to feel like you are doing different things when you are doing different things. When different things are happening in universe, I want you, the player, to feel like you are doing different things. Because I love doing that. At least as much as can be done using dice. The standard 7 role-playing dice. I'm currently leaning away from implementing things other than dice and charts that the dice reference. Simply because I don't want to introduce tarot cards and make everybody have to go buy tarot cards. And introduce other custom things that then you have to print out and assemble. And if I do any of that, and I might, my current working theory is there is a way, maybe a less interesting, less fun way, that it gets replicated through dice and tables and what have you, so that you can still do it and still have it work the same, but you don't have to go make additional purchases. I don't want RPG players to have to go make additional purchases just to play my game. I don't want, or to play a game using my rules. It's not my game. I have a whole video on that. So yeah, just using the standard dice. But when you are swinging a sword at somebody, when you are in melee combat, that is fundamentally different than being in ranged combat. It is fundamentally different than shooting arrows from bows, or shooting arrows from crossbows, or throwing knives at things. What you are doing in universe, what the swordsman would be doing, what the bowman would be doing, are completely different. The things you're concerned about, the actions you're taking, vastly, vastly different. Most RPGs, to keep things simple, to keep play moving, to keep the rules something everybody can just keep in their heads, allowing people to easily switch between ranged and melee combat, they're the same. The experience at the table for the player is the same, regardless of whether you're in melee combat or ranged combat. I want to bring in that verisimilitude for the players too, so that you as a player feel like you're doing something different when you're engaged in melee combat, when you're engaged in ranged combat, when you're casting spells, when you're sneaking, when you're doing any of these different things. I want the players to feel like what they're doing is different. I want their actions to have to change. And yeah, that would be a lot of work to bother balancing, which is why if you go watch my previous, it's one of the videos for the Kickstarter, not a design diaries video, I apologize. But if you go watch that video, I explain why it is I'm not concerned about game balance. So I'm not balancing any of that. I'm making it feel different, and I am balancing it in so much as that I don't want the player in melee combat to feel like choosing melee combat was stupid because ranged combat is just so good. To solve that issue, I'm looking at more of a rock paper scissors type approach, or a rock paper scissors lizard Spock, if you prefer, type approach, where, yeah, melee combat, great in some scenarios, terrible in others. Ranged combat, great in some scenarios, terrible in others. To give everybody moments to shine. And yeah, it's gonna be a lot of work on the GM to balance that and make it fun for everybody at the table. And I will plan on providing advice. I do plan on providing advice in the final book on how to do that once I have finalized all the rules and I know how to do that. But yeah, I want... Get down, cat. I want the game to feel different for the player when the actions in the game are different for the characters. Bringing that verisimilitude across so that it helps to marry the play and the story together in a way that not as much mental fortitude or mental investment is required to match those up, to get those to be one thing in your mind. Because the less you're taken out of the game trying to bridge that gap, the easier it is to play your characters, to do the types of things your characters want. I also find, at least for me and my players, that when the rules can be trusted, you're more willing to do things. I cannot tell you the number of games where somebody asked, can I jump on my shield, ride it down the banister, leap off of it, and stab that guy in the chest with my short sword? And the GM either went simple, said yes, and allowed the player to do it, making like one roll to see if he could successfully slide down the banister and one attack roll with a bonus. And every time I've seen that, it was less satisfying. Okay, not every time, but a lot of the times I've seen that. It's just less satisfying because it's basically the same as making a normal attack, but with an extra step. Or the GM tried making it feel cooler by having extra rolls and having extra things, except the GM was making it up on the fly. And the GM didn't, because there's no reference in the rules for what types of things that exist in the game that should be used for, and how you set difficulties for those things, target numbers, that people knows what to roll. And nobody knows, like the GM had to make it up. And depending on how well the GM did and how the player felt about it, because if the player failed, the player might just feel that, like, yeah, the GM set the difficulty too high. The GM used a skill that makes no sense. The GM used a part of the game that shouldn't have been used. You know, you can end up in those type of scenarios. Because I plan on having the rules created to allow those type of events. With rules to allow those type of events. It makes it so that the players are more willing to engage with those types of things because that trust is there. And if your group already has that trust with your GM who's just making things up on the fly, adding to the existing rules, awesome. Like, keep doing what is fun for you. I'm not telling you you're doing it wrong. I'm not telling you your game is bad or anything. I'm just saying your experience is not everybody's experience. And for those people who have tried what is successful, For other groups, making it up on the fly and just didn't like it. It just didn't feel good for you. So you don't do those things anymore. And all of your combats become walk up to enemy, swing at weapon until enemy's dead, walk up to next enemy, and it's getting boring, but nobody's willing to break out of that pattern, either because it's harder or because it's less successful. I'm hoping to create rules that will create scenarios via the rules without the GM having to try super hard to allow you to do even cooler things. I'm hoping you trust the rules enough that it brings you into the game. That's why verisimilitude is so important, why I'm focused on it so much. And I hope you agree that this is a new, unique way of doing things, and that it's going to work out great for at least some groups out there.